Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and today Apple released iOS 13.5 GM, or Golden Master. This is the final version that will come out to the public fairly soon, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on, but this brings some updates, some feature changes, and some bug fixes as well, and came in at a very large 4.16 gigabytes on my iPhone 11 Pro Max. It also came in similarly sized on the iPhone XR, the iPhone 6s Plus, and the iPad Air 2, which the iPad Air 2 was more like 3 gigabytes as far as its overall size. And that's because we're going from a public beta or a beta to a final version. And so it has to fully reinstall the operating system again. Now let's take a look at the build number. The build number is 17F75, and because there's no number on the end, that means this is basically the final version. And so I would expect this to be out fairly soon, and this is what will be on the public devices once it comes out. Now, this particular update was released alongside watchOS 6.2.5, which is now out to the public, and expect a video from me later on that, along with tvOS 13.4.5 and also iPadOS 13.5 GM. And that's the same thing that I have here. iOS and iPadOS are basically the same. Now, with this update, there's no modem update, so don't expect any changes as far as Wi-Fi or LTE changes. There's no modem updates that I could find anyway. But there are some new features, and the first one has to do with music, where you can share songs to Instagram. So if we go into music, you'll see I have a song here. We'll tap the 3 dots, and then we'll go to share. And under share, we now have Instagram, and we can share this to Instagram stories and Facebook stories. So it'll take just a moment, and I won't do that now, but you'll see we can share it to Instagram or Facebook stories here, and it just makes it easier to do if you want to share music that way. Now there's some updates to Face ID that allows you to use the phone more easily with a mask. So for example, when you pick up your phone with Face ID, if you're not wearing a mask, it just unlocks. But if you're wearing a mask, it's a little bit different. So let me show you. Now with a mask on, if you lift your phone and try and unlock it, it will go immediately to the passcode to allow you to put in your password because it recognizes your face looks like you've got a mask on. And this will apply to things like Face ID for Apple Pay, and also your passwords and everything else. So it will make it much easier to get into your device if you're wearing a mask. Now, along with the updates to Face ID, they've also added exposure notifications for contact tracing. Now, this is turned off by default, and there's no way to enable it unless you have an app installed that allows you to use it. So if you go to your settings, and then you go down to privacy, and then you go to health, under health, you'll see there's exposure logging. Now it's off by default, and if we go into it, we cannot turn it on unless there's an app set up designated to actually use this. So once you install an app that wants to use it, you have to allow it as well. So it doesn't just use it by default. And then also you've got exposure checks here, and you can go into that and see any exposure checks. Now, again, you don't have to use this. It's off by default, and there's no way to turn it on unless you have an app that actually wants to use it. So it's for privacy reasons, and it's here, but it's off. So if you want to use it and you have an app available where you live, you'll be able to use it very easily. And this will communicate with Android phones as well using Bluetooth when that's turned on. Now, along with the contact tracing, there's updates to emergency services to go along with that. So for example, if you're in the US, where this is the only place this feature will work currently, I'm sure that Apple will have to talk to your government and things in order to get this to work elsewhere. But right now, if you're in the United States and you use your Health ID, which is under settings, and then if you go down to health, under health, you have your health profile and medical ID. There's an option in here now that allows you to automatically share your health information from your medical ID when you place an emergency call. So if you go into medical ID, down at the bottom, it says share during emergency call. And this is enabled on mine because I turned it on. Now this is off by default. So if you don't want to share your information, such as your emergency contacts, your blood type, your weight, your height, all of those things, you can keep it turned off. But if you want to share it and you need to place an emergency call, you can. Now that goes along with today's watchOS 6.2.5, where it will share if it senses a fall and things like that. If you have those emergency calls turned on, where it will place a call if it senses a problem, that can all coincide together with that feature and give the dispatcher that you're speaking with a little more information. Now there's some updates to FaceTime as well. So if we go into settings and then we go down to FaceTime, at the bottom, there's a new option for automatic prominence, and it says during group FaceTime calls, the tile of the person speaking will automatically become larger. Now this is on by default, and that's how group FaceTime calls currently work. But if you're in a large group FaceTime call and you don't want that the person speaking popping up constantly, maybe you have a lot of people talking, you can simply turn it off or leave it on depending on how many calls you place and how many people you're speaking to. So it's just a nice little option that they've added. Now there's some bug fixes as well in this update, and the first one has to do with that text crash bug. So people that were having the text message come through with those odd characters, it would cause your phone to crash. That will no longer cause the phone to crash and it will work fine. So maybe you saw that bug on messages or Twitter or somewhere else. Your phone will no longer crash when those characters come up. Now, also, they've fixed an issue where users may see a black screen when trying to play streaming videos from some websites, so that's fixed. Now, they've also updated and addressed an issue in the share sheet where suggestions and actions may not load. So maybe you're trying to share a song and the suggested people aren't showing up like they did earlier for me. It will now work properly, so it seems to be working fine for me. And then finally on iPadOS, there's one more thing in the note as far as what's actually fixed. And it's kind of odd that it's on iPadOS, but not iOS, since they're the same thing as far as mail and everything else. So if I go into my photos here, I snapped a photo of it, and you'll see at the bottom, it says it resolves security issues, including some that could lead to unexpected memory corruption or stability issues with the Mail app. Now, I didn't see this on iOS, but it's on iPadOS. I would imagine it carries across to iOS, but it wasn't in the notes, at least from what I saw on the notes. So it's there with iPadOS. I would imagine it's there with iOS, but it's just something to note. And hopefully they've fixed issues with mail, with it showing mail properly when you have notifications. It seems like it's working okay, but only time will tell. Now, as far as battery life on this particular update, I've been using the betas for a while now, and iOS 13.5 beta 4 was actually quite good. So if I go to the battery, you'll see my battery health is at 98%, and your battery health does not go down when you install an update. It simply rechecks the physical quality of the battery or its maximum capacity. So 98% after 6 months is quite good, but 80% after 2 years is completely normal. And so on my best day with the previous version, I got 5 hours and 15 minutes of screen on time and 3 hours and 8 minutes of screen off time. That's pretty good. That means overall, since it only used 50% of my battery, I would get almost 10 to 12 hours of screen on time and maybe 6 or 7 hours of screen off time. That's actually quite good battery usage. You'll see, depending on the day, my usage varies, but that was my best day, and it seems to be doing fine overall. Now, because this is a newer version, it will take a few days to measure. You cannot check by seeing how fast it goes down from 100%. That's not really an accurate way. You need to give it a few days to see how the battery handles everything, and then you'll know how battery life is overall. Now, as far as performance is concerned, it's been quite good. I've actually been using this, well, since it came out anyway, and I've had no freeze-ups or lock-ups like I have in previous betas. So it looks like Apple may have stabilized this. I haven't seen any issues, and I haven't seen any issues on older devices as well. So on my iPhone XR, I tried opening things like music just to see how fast they would load and scroll, going into settings quickly, going back out. And the same is true on the oldest device here, the iPhone 6s Plus. So again, scrolling is nice and smooth, just like you'd expect. You can scroll fine, rotate to landscape on the home screen on the Plus devices, and go back into music. It just seems to perform basically the same as the 11 Pro Max, unless maybe I was loading a game. You may see a slight delay there, but really it's performing very well. And I think for the most part, people will be happy with it. Now let's take a look at the benchmark scores, or the Geekbench scores. Now, if we go into Geekbench 5, that's what I'm using to measure this. You'll see my single core score was 1,328. Multi-core was 3,339. Now, this is pretty good, but keep in mind that I actually ran this right after I updated the OS. So this usually will improve if I measure it a few hours or a day later. Now, if we take a look at the history, you'll see here, it is a little bit lower as far as single and multi-core, but again, expect those to increase maybe over the next few hours or days as all of the background processes are completed. Now let's take a look at all of these devices so you can compare yours with what I have here. Now on the far left, I have the iPad Air 2, followed by the iPhone 6s Plus, then the iPhone XR, and then the iPhone 11 Pro Max. And this will just give you a general baseline of what your scores will be. And again, they'll probably be a little bit higher after a few hours. Now, as far as a release date for iOS 13.5, well, there's quite a few sources that say it will come out as soon as tomorrow. And that makes sense. I've seen GMs come out and then the final come out a day or two later. That's pretty typical, sometimes a week later. But many sources are saying The 19th is when we should see it. If we don't see it then, expect it later this week, and at the latest the following week. But again, I would expect it tomorrow. Now, as far as new features and changes, people were asking me, will we see iOS 13.5.1 or 13.6 by the end of the year? And yes, I think we'll see some new versions up until August, because Apple generally gets iOS 14 ready in June for beta testers and then releases it to the public in September. But based on the way things are going this year, maybe we'll see it in October. It's really hard to say exactly when we'll see it, but if they keep doing what they've done year after year, expect iOS 14 to be released in September with iOS 13 updates all the way up into August or so. But it's hard to say what Apple's actually going to do, and you never know. They could change their plans at any minute. If you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, of course,